Okay, so you want to hear the whole crazy story about my date with Zainab. Honestly, just thinking about it makes me cringe all over again. But here goes nothing. It all started on this dating app, the one everyone uses. Her profile was full of these laughing pictures, like she was always in the middle of a great joke. She seemed fun, the kind of person who wouldn't be boring. We messaged back and forth for a bit, and the conversation was easy. She suggested we meet up at this Nando's in the city center. I was totally cool with that. It's a chill spot, no weird pressure to be super fancy, and you can just have a normal conversation over some decent food. I remember getting ready, thinking this could actually be a good time. I got to the restaurant a few minutes early. I always do that. Nerves, I guess. I snagged a booth in the back corner, one of those high-backed ones that gives you a bit of privacy. The place was pretty busy, the usual Thursday night crowd. There was a big group of friends laughing really loud a few tables over, and the air was full of that smell of grilled chicken and spices. I was just scrolling through my phone, trying to look casual when I saw her walk in. She spotted me right away and waved, this huge, confident smile on her face. She was wearing a bright yellow jacket, which kind of stood out, and she walked over with so much energy. She slid into the booth across from me and immediately started talking about how hard it was to find parking, which broke the ice. So far, so good. We started with the usual small talk. What do you do? Where did you grow up? All that stuff. She was a graphic designer, which sounded cool. She had strong opinions on fonts, which I found weirdly charming. The waiter came over, this young guy who looked a bit stressed, and we ordered our drinks. I got a Coke, she got a Fanta. We were both looking at the menus, and she pointed at the extra hot peri-peri sauce and said, "I'm gonna destroy that." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. I have a medium kind of van myself. I can handle a bit of heat, but I don't see the point in punishing myself. When the waiter came back, I ordered a medium chicken burger with chips. Zainab ordered a quarter chicken with a side of chips and then asked for an extra bottle of the extra hot peri-peri sauce. The waiter raised an eyebrow, but just nodded and wrote it down. The food arrived pretty quickly. It looked great. My burger was perfect, and her chicken was sizzling. For the first 5 minutes, everything was completely normal. We were eating, talking about movies we wanted to see. She seemed totally fine. Then she decided to pour the entire extra bottle of sauce over her chicken. I'm not kidding, she emptied it. The chicken was swimming in this dark red, ominous-looking liquid. She cut a big piece, loaded it onto her fork, and ate it. Her face went from normal to bright red in about 10 seconds flat. Her eyes got really wide, and she started breathing in these short, sharp little gasps. She grabbed her Fanta and took a massive gulp, but it didn't seem to help. This is where things went off the rails. She didn't just sit there and suffer through it. She stood up from the booth and started pacing right next to our table. Back and forth, back and forth. She was fanning her mouth with her hand, making these pained whimpering sounds. The group of friends nearby had stopped laughing and were now staring at her. I felt my face getting hot with second-hand embarrassment. I asked her if she was okay, if she wanted some water or milk. She just shook her head, her eyes watering, and her pacing got faster and wider. She started doing a full lap around the central section of the restaurant, past other people's tables. Everyone was watching now. The whole place had gotten a lot quieter. Then she started talking, or more like complaining, but really loud. "This is insane. Who can eat this? This isn't food. This is a chemical attack. My mouth is on fire. Is this a joke?" She was addressing the whole room, not me, not the staff. Just yelling her complaints into the air. The same waiter who had taken our order, looking even more stressed than before, cautiously approached her. He had a concerned look on his face. "Ma'am, is everything all right? Can I get you something? Some yogurt, perhaps?" He was trying to be helpful. Zainab stopped pacing and just stared at him. Her expression was a mixture of pure pain and absolute fury. She was still holding the empty peri-peri sauce bottle. She looked from his face down to the bottle in her hand, and then back to his face. It was like time slowed down. I saw her fingers tighten around the bottle. I saw her arm draw back. I opened my mouth to say something, to stop her, but no sound came out. In one fluid, terrifying motion, she flung the entire contents of the bottle, which, remember, was empty, but still had a lot of sauce clinging to the inside, directly at the waiter's chest. There was a wet, slapping sound. A huge, glistening red stain spread across the front of his pristine white shirt and his black apron. A single drop of sauce dripped from the apron onto the clean floor. The waiter looked down at his chest in utter disbelief, then back up at Zainab. The restaurant was completely, deathly silent. You could hear the kitchen fan whirring from the back. Zainab, her mission accomplished, walked calmly back to our booth, sat down, took another long drink of her Fanta, wiped her mouth with a napkin, looked directly at me with her still watery eyes, and said, "So, as I was saying, that new superhero movie looks like it has a good plot." I just sat there, stunned. My brain could not process what had just happened. I looked at the waiter, who was still standing there, frozen and covered in sauce. I looked at the other customers, who were all staring at us with a mixture of horror and fascination. I looked at Zainab, who was now calmly cutting another piece of her nuclear chicken as if nothing had happened. My fight or flight instinct finally kicked in, and it was all flight. I mumbled, I have to go to the bathroom. I grabbed my jacket, slid out of the booth, and instead of heading to the restrooms, I beelined for the front door. I didn't look back. I just walked out into the cool night air, my heart hammering in my chest. I walked for 3 blocks before I even thought about stopping. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a string of messages from Zainab. "Where'd you go?" "My mouth is still burning, lol." That waiter was so dramatic. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number, hailed a cab, and went home. I ordered a pizza and spent the rest of the night just staring at my wall, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. I always thought first dates were supposed to feel a little unpredictable, like you're stepping into this weird little bubble where anything could happen. But the thing about unpredictability is you don't realize how much you like it until someone rips it away and hands you something way worse. That's basically what happened with Zaki. And honestly, looking back, the whole thing feels like one of those moments where you're watching yourself from the outside, wondering why you didn't just pretend to get a phone call and bolt. Anyway, it started on a random Thursday evening after school. I remember being kind of bored and craving something different from my usual routine of fast food and scrolling. So when I matched with Zaki, who looked normal enough and had this very chill profile, I figured why not. He suggested a small diner near the bus station, not fancy but decent enough. The kind of place where the menu photos look nothing like the food, but you still go because it's familiar. The second I walked in, I spotted him sitting at a booth like he'd been glued there for hours. He waved before I even saw him fully, like he just knew where I'd be looking. I remember thinking he was just excited or nervous. I slid into the booth and he said something about how I probably had a long day and would want something warm, and then he pushed a menu toward me like he was giving someone their meds. At first I thought he was just being nice. People make guesses all the time. But then I opened the menu. Before I even glanced at the options, he told the server I'd go for the chicken melt. That froze me. My go-to meal at literally every diner is the chicken melt. I mean, sure, a lot of people get it, but he said it like he'd known me since preschool. I just laughed and brushed it off, but something about the way he watched me, almost like he was checking a box in his head, made me feel weird. Then the real strange part started. I hadn't even picked up my phone in the first 5 minutes, but he said something like he figured I'd be annoyed that my bus card balance was probably low because I forgot to top it off. He said it so casually, with this weird confidence like he'd read a script of my entire week. And the thing is, I had just thought that earlier that day, but hadn't posted anything about it anywhere. I began wondering if it was just a lucky guess, but he kept doing it. He started talking about my favorite shows, my pet peeves, even the exact order I usually get this bubble tea place I go to with my cousins. Stuff I know I post about, sure, but something that was so old I forgot it existed. He mentioned a picture I deleted months ago, one that only stayed up for maybe an hour before I panicked about how bad the lighting looked. Somehow he had it memorized. I tried steering the conversation somewhere normal, but he beat me to every single topic. If I decided to bring up my old summer trip, he was already talking about the exact beach I visited before I even said a word. If I was about to mention my cousin's cat, he interrupted with the cat's name like it was some fun coincidence. And the worst part was he wasn't even showing off. He acted like this was just how conversations worked. At some point, I leaned back and crossed my arms, trying to figure out if he had some weird social media app that stalked everything I ever posted. He told me I was thinking about how creepy it felt. And that's when I snapped a little inside, like something tiny in my brain went nope. He wasn't guessing anymore. He was tracking every micro reaction on my face, every shift in my shoulders, every tiny pause. That part freaked me out more than the social media thing. Then came the food. When the plate showed up, he didn't even look. He just slid the extra fries toward me before taking his first bite because apparently, according to him, I always steal someone's fries when I'm pretending I'm not still hungry. And he was right, but I hated him for it. Not because of the fries, because he knew it before I even reached for them. Then the scariest moment happened. He leaned back like he was proud of himself and said I must be thinking about how to end the night early, and that I always lie about early mornings when I want to dip. He said he noticed the exact second I decided that, the same way he noticed it in a video I posted years ago, where I claimed I had homework, but actually just wanted to go home. And I swear, I didn't know how to react. I didn't want him knowing even more about me, so I tried to think about absolutely nothing. You have no idea how hard that is. He looked disappointed when I did that. He tilted his head and squinted like he was trying to read a blurry sign. Then he said something like I didn't have to hide my thoughts because he already memorized what I think in most situations. Hearing someone say that out loud, in a booth with sticky ketchup bottles and buzzing lights, felt way worse than if someone had screamed at me. I tried wrapping things up fast after that. I told him I needed to get home because my cousin needed help with something. He smiled like he predicted the exact excuse I'd pick. Then he said I'd probably head to the bus stop and pretend to scroll on my phone while trying to convince myself I wasn't freaked out. And that sealed it. I didn't even deny it. I just grabbed my stuff and left. Walking out of that diner felt like someone had peeled off a layer of my skin and replaced it with paranoia. Every step to the bus stop felt like I was leaving the crime scene, even though nothing technically happened. I didn't dare look behind me in case he was still reading me from a distance. I got home and went through every old post, deleting half of them before I even realized how long I'd been doing it. I still catch myself second-guessing every move I make online, wondering who memorized what. A guy who didn't just look me up online, but treated my entire personality like homework he wanted to ace. It still creeps me out how proud he looked when he predicted what I'd say next. I don't think I'll ever forget that. I didn't plan on going out with Phil. I really didn't. He wasn't even my type. His profile felt like someone copied random quotes from motivational posters and glued them together. But I was bored, and sometimes boredom makes you think, sure, maybe this guy who keeps posting blurry shirtless gym selfies could be interesting for one night. I figured worst case, I'd get a free meal or at least a weird story to tell my friends during lunch. I had no idea how weird it would actually get. The date was at this old burger place near the mall, the kind that still has those squeaky red boots and smells like fry oil no matter where you stand. It wasn't fancy, but I liked that. It felt normal, and normal is exactly what I thought I was walking into. I got there a little early, mostly because the bus came sooner than I expected, and I didn't want to wander the mall pretending to shop again. I slid into a booth near the window and started messing with the salt packets just to look busy. Then Phil walked in. He spotted me instantly because he was carrying this tiny locked briefcase like some detective from a movie. It looked totally out of place with his jeans and that weird too-tight button-up he wore. The briefcase wasn't big enough to be professional, but it was way too serious for a normal date. It was the kind of thing someone might use to carry rare coins or valuable snacks into the movies. He set it on the boot seat beside him like it needed its own space. The first thing I noticed was that he kept touching it, like he was checking to make sure it hadn't vanished or grown legs. He barely said hello before he slid into this long ramble about how excited he was to finally meet someone he felt he could trust. I remember thinking that was already a red flag, but I just smiled and nodded because I didn't want to start the date with awkward tension. We ordered food, and I held on to the tiny hope that maybe he'd eventually act normal. He didn't. He kept shifting his weight and leaning closer, like the whole place was bugged, and he was waiting for someone to jump out from behind the soda fountain and arrest him. Eventually, he popped open the briefcase just a crack, blocking it with his body like he was shielding top-secret blueprints. I caught a glimpse of papers and something that looked like a map, maybe, but I wasn't about to lean over. I liked my personal space. He finally cleared his throat and said he had something important to show me after we finished eating. So now I was stuck eating a burger while imagining the briefcase containing anything from stolen jewelry to a strange sandwich he didn't want anyone to see. Every time the server walked by, he'd snap the briefcase shut even though it wasn't even open. Once the plates were cleared, Phil straightened his back like he was preparing to announce the cure for boredom. He told me he'd been doing research for months. He said he discovered what he called a high-yield opportunity. He said it like he was dropping the secret code to some underground club. Then he slid the briefcase closer to me and opened it. I expected money or documents or something impressive. Instead, it was just a mess of printed pages, newspaper clippings, and a little notebook filled with scribbles that looked like a kid practicing secret messages. He started walking me through his plan, which didn't feel like a plan so much as a fever dream someone scribbled during a power outage. He said the idea was simple. That was the first lie. Nothing about it was simple. According to him, if I agreed, we'd make a bunch of money and disappear for a while before coming back and living like nothing happened. He kept tapping his notebook like he was presenting solid facts. I just listened because I didn't know how to escape without making a scene. Then he said the part that made my brain freeze. He said the whole thing revolved around faking my death. Not his. Not some fictional person. Mine. I couldn't even respond. My mouth just stayed shut while he kept talking like he was explaining how to change a tire. He said he'd already picked the perfect location and had thought through every detail. He said he'd be the one to file the paperwork while I lived somewhere else under a different name for a while. He promised me that after collecting the payout, we'd split it. He even said he was being generous, offering me half because, technically, I'd be the one doing less work by just laying low. I remember staring at him and wondering how many dates he tried this on. He acted like this was normal, like he was pitching a business idea. He didn't seem nervous or embarrassed for joking. He actually believed this was something he could get a stranger to agree to after a burger and fries. He explained how insurance companies wouldn't notice if it was done correctly. He said he had studied patterns and statistics, which made no sense because I could tell he wasn't exactly the research type. He pointed at the map and said he'd chosen a spot near a lake because lakes made things look convincing. His confidence freaked me out more than the idea itself. At one point, he even slid a pen toward me like he expected me to sign something. It wasn't a contract, just a blank piece of paper, but he acted like it was the final step. I pushed it back slowly, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, he interpreted it as hesitation and launched into another explanation about how people do wild things for money all the time. My brain went straight into escape mode. I wasn't about to argue with a guy who walked into a casual burger place carrying a locked briefcase full of fake death plans. So I did the only thing I could think of. I said I needed to use the restroom. He nodded like he understood nerves and told me to take my time. Once I got inside the hallway, I didn't even pretend to go in. I walked straight out the side door. The cold air outside the restaurant hit me like someone poured icy water down my neck. I didn't look back. I pulled out my phone and started typing as fast as I could, calling a ride before even reaching the sidewalk. I kept expecting him to burst out the door, chasing me with his little briefcase bouncing against his leg. I got home and locked him on everything before I even took off my shoes. Part of me still wonders what he did when he realized I wasn't coming back. Did he sit there flipping through his pages again? Did he look around the restaurant like someone had taken his masterpiece plan? Did he try it on the next girl he matched with? All I know is I'll never look at a small locked briefcase the same way again.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
I swear I didn't go into this date expecting anything wild. I was honestly just trying to get out of the house because my cousins were arguing over who stole whose hoodie again, and the whole place felt like a pressure cooker. So when Yasmin messaged me asking if I wanted to grab something sweet at this frozen yogurt place near the old movie theater, it sounded perfect. Low effort, cheap, fast, easy escape if things got boring. I figured we'd talk about normal stuff like school or dumpster shows, or whatever people talk about when they're just trying to pass time. The yogurt place was half empty when I got there. The lights were kind of dim, not in a romantic way, but more like management forgot to replace the bulbs. The floor was sticky, and the machines made these weird humming sounds like they were struggling to stay alive. But honestly, I kind of liked that. It felt familiar, like a spot you go to when you don't want to pretend to be impressive. I got there first and grabbed a tiny paper cup, staring at the toppings like they were going to give me a sign about how the night would go. I ended up mixing the fake strawberry flavor with the plain vanilla because I panic when I have too many choices. I was halfway through pouring when I saw her walk in. Yasmin looked normal, just normal. Hoodie, jeans, hair tied back. No weird accessories, no strange energy, no locked briefcase like Phil. She walked up smiling like she actually wanted to be there, which was refreshing after the last few dates I'd been on. She got her cup, sat down across from me, and it started off exactly how you'd expect. Casual, easy, kind of boring in a peaceful way. We talked about random stuff for a while. School stress, her job at a tiny clothing store that barely survived on weekend shoppers, my cousins constantly fighting over nothing. She laughed at the right moments and made these little comments that made me think maybe we get along. Nothing about her felt off. Not even a little. If anything, she seemed too normal, like background character normal. Somewhere around 20 minutes in, she got quiet. Not awkward quiet. More like she remembered something she'd been avoiding. She kept tapping her spoon against the empty cup, staring at it like there was something important hidden at the bottom. I didn't push her. I figured she was just zoning out or trying to think of a new topic. But then she looked up at me with this expression I still can't really explain. Not sad, not worried, just heavy, like she was about to lift something big off her chest. She said she needed to tell me something. My stomach tightened immediately because nothing good ever comes after that sentence. She took this tiny breath and said she didn't expect a match with me. She said she didn't even know what to do when she saw my face pop up. I remember thinking maybe she recognized me from school, or maybe we had mutual friends. That would have been the normal explanation, but she kept going. She said she'd gone to the frozen yogurt place a few times trying to imagine how she'd bring this up if she ever saw me in person. That's when I started feeling this weird pressure in my chest. I didn't know what she was building toward, but I knew it wasn't something simple. Then she told me she was the driver who hit my brother years ago. I didn't react at first. It felt like the words froze in the air between us. I just stared at her, waiting for my brain to catch up. The room didn't go quiet dramatically or anything, but suddenly I was hyper aware of every sound. The buzzing light, the machine humming, someone dropping a napkin behind me. It all felt too normal for what she just said. My brother was fine now, mostly, but he'd gone through months of recovery, and the whole thing had messed up our family for a long time. We never knew who hit him. The driver never came forward. It was this big, unfinished chapter we all tried to move past, but still whispered about sometimes when it got late, and everyone was tired. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her hands because I didn't want to look at her face. She kept talking anyway. She said she'd been young and scared and driving her mom's old car without permission. She said she panicked and left the scene because she thought she'd ruin her whole life if she stayed. She said she told herself every day she'd come clean eventually, but then more time passed and it got harder and harder. She said when she matched with me by accident, she took it as some kind of sign that she needed to finally face it. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused. Confused why she thought telling me this on a date was the right move. Confused why she said she'd been hoping I'd forgiven her already, when this was literally the first time I'd found out. Confused why she thought matching with me wasn't the worst coincidence ever. She kept explaining, like she couldn't stop once she started. She said she'd checked on my brother's progress over the years without us knowing. She said she memorized details she had no right to know, like what hospital he went to and what kind of cast he had. She said every time she saw a picture of him online, she felt guilty all over again. She said she thought maybe if I heard it from her directly, I'd understand she wasn't a bad person, just someone who made a huge mistake. I knew she wanted some big emotional response, but I couldn't give her anything. I couldn't even look at her. I kept staring at the sticky table and thinking about the nights my mom cried in the kitchen when she thought we were asleep. I thought about the way my brother limped around the house for months. I thought about how none of us ever got answers. My hands started shaking, not from fear or anger, just from this weird mix of emotions that didn't fit together. I felt sick and tired and weirdly calm all at once. I finally looked up and saw her waiting, like my reaction would determine something important about her future. That made it worse. I stood up slowly because I couldn't stay in that seat any longer. She tried saying my name, but I didn't stay to hear the rest. I tossed my cup in the trash and walked out. The whole parking lot looked different, like someone had tilted the world a little. I could still taste the frozen yogurt, and somehow that made everything feel worse. I didn't run. I just walked. I didn't look back because I didn't want to see her face again. I got to the bus stop and sat there staring at the ground, trying to process what she'd said and how casually she said it. The bus ride home felt twice as long as usual. When I got inside, I didn't tell anyone. I just went to my room and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled noise of my cousins arguing again. So, yeah, that was my date with Yasmin. Not dramatic, not loud, not explosive. Just heavy. Heavier than anything a frozen yogurt date should be. I still don't know what she expected to happen, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the truth now that it's mine. I always tell myself I'm done with first dates for a while, and then I get bored and end up agreeing to one anyway. That's pretty much how I ended up meeting Linda. I remember sitting on the couch scrolling through messages while my cousin blasted music in the next room, and her profile popped up with this picture of her holding a latte like it was a trophy. She looked normal in that I'd probably have strong opinions about pumpkin spice kind of way, and she suggested we meet at this quiet sandwich shop near the lake. I figured it sounded chill enough. Plus, it was early afternoon, so even if it went horribly, at least the whole day wouldn't be ruined. The place she picked was one of those small, older spots squeezed between a bike store and a dusty antique shop that had a mannequin in the window wearing a suit from like 5 decades ago. The sandwich shop had this faded green awning and tables that looked like they'd been stolen from someone's backyard. But the smells inside were amazing, and everything felt calmer than my house, so I didn't mind waiting there. I got there a bit early and ordered a lemonade because I didn't want to sit empty-handed like I was waiting for an Uber that forgot me. The worker behind the counter kept wiping the same area over and over like he was trying to erase the counter itself. It was weirdly calming to watch. I picked a seat by the window so I could pretend to be looking at something important if things got awkward. Linda arrived 5 minutes later, holding her coat like she'd been speed walking and needed to cool down. She smiled when she saw me, and it looked genuine, not the forced kind people use when they already want to go home. She sat down across from me and started talking immediately about how she almost got caught in the bike store next door because some kid rode right into the aisle and scared her. That broke the ice, and for the first 10 minutes, everything felt normal. We ordered food, nothing fancy, just simple sandwiches and chips. She talked fast, but in a kind of energetic way, like her brain was always one step ahead of her mouth. I thought maybe she was just nervous. First dates make everyone act worried sometimes. I didn't think too much about it until the mood shifted. It started when she kept glancing over my shoulder. Not casually. Not like she was distracted. More like she was checking something. At first, I thought maybe she saw someone she knew or she was nervous sitting near the window. But her eyes kept flicking to the same corner near the ceiling, almost like she expected something to drop down from there. Then she leaned forward a bit and lowered her voice in this super serious way I didn't expect. She said she was going to tell me something, and she needed me to hear the whole thing before reacting. I didn't even have time to process that because she dove right in. She said she wasn't just someone who worked in retail like she put on her profile. She said she was part of something called Witness Relocation Informant Status. The name alone sounded like she read it off a file she wasn't supposed to open. Her face stayed calm, but her hands were gripping the edge of the table like she was grounding herself. She explained she had testified years ago against some group she didn't name. She kept referring to them as the people like she was scared to even describe them. She said the government moved her around every so often and gave her new names and new jobs. She said she had protocols she had to follow. She lifted her sleeve a little and showed me this small black device taped to the inside of her arm, which she said wasn't medical. She said it was for monitoring. My stomach dropped a bit, but I stayed still because I honestly didn't know what to do. She looked dead serious. No hint of a joke, no smile, just this focused expression like she was letting me into something huge and dangerous. Then she told me the part that made everything inside me twist. She said the conversation we were having was being recorded. Not by her phone, not by the sandwich shop, but by the team she was assigned to. She said they monitored every interaction she had with someone new to make sure she wasn't being approached by anyone connected to the people she testified against. I remember staring at the little plant on the table, wondering if there was a camera in the leaves or something. She said they needed to make sure I wasn't a threat. I couldn't even speak. I didn't know whether to feel insulted, scared, or both. Apparently, once she matched with me, she immediately had to send my profile to her handler because she said dating apps were considered high risk. She said they read all her messages, including the dumb ones where I talked about how I always drop my phone on my face when I lay down. The idea of strangers listening to our conversation right that moment felt unreal. She pointed at the ceiling corner she kept checking earlier and said she could tell where recording devices usually placed in public. She said she didn't think the shop had any, but her team wasn't relying on the building anyway. They had their own feed. She said once we left, she would have to fill out a report on whether I acted suspicious. Suspicious. Me. Someone who panics when asked to choose between two types of chips. The more she talked, the more the sandwich in front of me felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She said if I kept seeing her, I would have to accept that our conversations wouldn't stay just between us. She said I shouldn't worry unless I had some kind of hidden agenda. She said she hoped I didn't. She looked at me like she was waiting to catch the smallest twitch in my expression. I wasn't scared in a dramatic way. It felt more like I was sinking slowly into cold water, fully aware but unable to climb out. I kept thinking about the little device on her arm, the way she kept scanning the room, the way she mentioned her team like they were listening right then. I told her I needed to grab napkins just to get a minute to breathe. I walked to the counter pretending everything was normal, grabbed the napkins, and stood there like I was reading the soda machine options, just trying to decide how to leave without setting off some imaginary alarm. When I walked back to the table, she was watching me carefully, almost studying me. I sat down, placed the napkins on the table, and told her I needed to head out soon to help my cousin with something. It was the first excuse that popped into my head, but she accepted it after thinking for a second longer than she should have. We wrapped up and she reminded me she might be checked in on later that day. I nodded even though I didn't fully understand what she meant. When we walked out, she said she hoped our meeting didn't get flagged as unusual. I forced a smile and wished her good luck. I didn't relax until I was 2 blocks away. I didn't block her immediately, mostly because I was scared she'd think that was suspicious. But I didn't message her either. I didn't want to imagine some unknown team replaying our conversation and deciding anything about me. I didn't even want to go out that night, honestly. I'd had one of those drained out days where everything felt like it weighed 5 times more than it should. My backpack felt heavier, my steps felt slower, even my hair felt annoying. But my cousin kept telling me I needed to stop staying home every weekend or I was going to turn into some kind of couch fungus. So when Darnell messaged me asking if I wanted to grab wings at this little sports bar near his place, I figured whatever. Maybe some fried food and loud TV noise would yank me out of my mood. The spot wasn't anything fancy. It sat in this weird strip of stores that had a laundromat, a vape place that always looked empty, and a bakery that was somehow open at all hours, even though nobody ever seemed to be inside. The sports bar sat at the corner, glowing orange from this giant neon sign shaped like a cheesy football. It buzzed nonstop, and the door made this weird suction sound every time someone opened it. The smell of fried stuff in the air was honestly comforting. I got there a little early and waited outside because I didn't want to awkwardly sit alone inside while sports dudes yelled at the screens. The sun was almost gone, but the sky still had that weird blue tint, and a couple of cars cruised by blasting music too loud for their own speakers. I kept checking my phone until I saw him walking up from the bus stop. Darnell looked normal enough. He had this hoodie that was too big and jeans that looked like they'd survived 100 adventures, but he smiled when he saw me, and it seemed like a regular smile, not some weird forced one. When we hugged hello, it was just a quick thing. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just a casual, hey, good to see you hug. We went inside, grabbed the table, ordered wings, fries, and sodas that tasted like they'd been mixed by someone who didn't check the syrup machine. For the first 20 minutes, the date was surprisingly chill. We talked about random stuff. He told me a story about how he once tried to teach his little brother how to skateboard, but ended up rolling into a bush. I laughed because the way he told it sounded so chaotic. The wings came out super crispy, and everything felt like it was heading toward one of those perfectly average dates that you remember as not bad, but never talk about again. Then he said he needed to use the restroom. Normal. I didn't think twice. I just nodded and took another wing, burning my tongue like I always do when I don't wait. I scrolled through my phone a bit, checking memes and trying not to look like the person left behind on a date. I didn't even notice how long he was gone until the server walked by twice and gave me that weird, is he ditching you look. I started to wonder if he had left when I finally saw him walking back, except this time he was moving slow, like really slow. He was cradling his arm against his stomach, and not casually either. He had it in a sling. A sling. I blinked because I thought maybe I was hallucinating or he'd gotten into some weird bathroom brawl. But no, he walked right toward me like this was perfectly normal. The sling was this off-white thing that looked like it came from someone's emergency kit, not like something he just had lying around. At first I thought maybe he'd hurt himself slipping on the wet floor or something, but he sat down with this dramatic wince like he was performing for an audience. I asked what happened, but he didn't answer directly. Instead, he took a slow breath and looked at me with this weird mixture of guilt and expectation. He said he didn't want me to feel bad, but he was trying to figure out how to tell me gently. And then he said something that knocked all logic out of my head. He said I did it. Apparently, according to him, whom he hugged outside, something about the angle or the way I leaned in had twisted his arm. He said he heard a pop, and then he tried to shake it off in the restroom, but the pain was too much, so he improvised a sling out of his hoodie and some random cloth he found. I remember staring at him thinking there was no way any of this was real. The hug was like 2 seconds long, and I definitely didn't twist him like some wrestling move. He acted like he was trying to be brave about it, but he also kept dropping little comments about how much it hurt. He said he probably couldn't get home on his own. He talked about how his apartment keys were always tricky for him, even with 2 working arms. He said public transit would be too hard for him like this. Then he said that since the injury happened because of me, he didn't want to guilt trip me, but it made sense that I'd help him get home and maybe stay for a bit to assist him with basic stuff. The whole thing felt surreal. The sports bar was loud and people were laughing. Some dude at the bar was yelling at the TV about a missed shot. And meanwhile, Darnell was sitting there with his makeshift sling telling me I had ruined his arm. It didn't help that he kept staring like he already knew my answer, like he was waiting for me to apologize dramatically or burst into caretaker mode. I tried suggesting he let a staff member call someone for him, maybe a friend or a family member. He said he didn't want to bother them. I mentioned maybe going to urgent care. He said he hated hospitals. Everything I suggested, he waved away like I'd offered him a terrible idea. He kept circling back to how I was responsible. The guilt trip was so obvious I could have underlined it. I told him I wasn't comfortable driving him home. He said it wasn't really a choice since he couldn't lift things or even open doors properly. He even tried demonstrating how he couldn't grip a fork with his other hand, dropping it dramatically onto the table. The server looked over confused, while I just sat there wanting to sink into the floor. The whole thing shifted from weird to unsettling fast. He started saying stuff about how accidents happen and how people show their real character when things go wrong. He hinted that if I left him behind like this, it would say something about the kind of person I was. He even said he was glad this happened now instead of later so he could see what I was really like. That was the moment something clicked in my head. I realized this was scripted, planned, rehearsed. He didn't look hurt. He didn't wince the same way twice. And the sling wasn't even tied correctly. It was just wrapped around his arm like a kid pretending to be injured in a school play. So I told him I needed to grab something from my backpack. I stood up, pushed my chair and walked toward the entrance, and didn't stop. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I just walked out into the cool night air straight to the bus stop, and kept my eyes on my phone so I wouldn't talk myself into turning around. I blocked him before the bus even arrived. I swear every time I agree to go on another date, it's because I forget how the last one went. My brain just hits reset like some cheap toy that's been dropped too many times. That's basically how Kyle happened. He messaged me one Friday afternoon while I was half asleep on the couch, scrolling through videos and pretending I wasn't supposed to be doing chores. His profile looked pretty normal, nothing weird except that he mentioned his dog in almost every photo. I figured he was just one of those people who treat their pets like they're kids, which is fine. Better than people who take pictures of their food like it's rare art. We decided to meet at this small outdoor cafe downtown, the one with the uneven tables that wobble if you breathe too hard. I got there early and took the table closest to the railing because I like watching random people walk by. The weather was decent, not too hot, not too cold, and the breeze smelled like toast for some reason. Cars rolled by, pigeons strutted around like they owned the place, and everything felt pretty normal. Kyle showed up a few minutes later, looking exactly like his photos except maybe a little taller, and he brought the dog. I don't know what I expected, but this dog was tiny, like smaller than some guinea pigs tiny. It had one of those shaggy coats that made it look like a moving dust ball, and it wore a bright vest that read, "Emotional support," even though it looked like it needed emotional support itself. Kyle sat down across from me, and the dog hopped right into his lap like it was trained for this exact moment. I tried not to stare at it, but the vest was so bright it felt like it was yelling at my eyes. I asked him about the dog, just to be polite, and he launched into this long explanation about how the dog helped him stay grounded and relaxed. He kept stroking it like he was petting a good luck charm. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal enough. We ordered ice drinks and some small food because neither of us wanted to commit to a full meal. Kyle talked about how the dog liked road trips and how it could sense when he felt stressed, and how he sometimes brought it into stores even when he wasn't supposed to because he said it worked better when it was given freedom. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I didn't question it because he seemed passionate about it. But then the dog started acting weird, not barking or anything loud, just sneaky. It kept disappearing under the table and then reappearing like it was performing some kind of tiny magic act. At first, I thought it was just restless or bored, which made sense because we'd been sitting there a while. But every time the dog came back to Kyle's lap, he'd give it this soft pat like he was congratulating it. That's when I noticed the first stolen thing. A woman at the table next to us was digging through her purse and muttering under her breath. She kept checking different pockets, then her jacket, then her purse again. She looked confused in that specific way people do when they're trying not to panic. She eventually gave up and shrugged it off, but something felt off. 2 minutes later, Kyle's tiny dog climbed back out of his lap with something shiny tangled in its fur. Kyle quickly untangled it and slid it into his pocket like he'd done it 100 times. He didn't even try to hide it from me. He just acted like it was normal. I froze. My brain was screaming, but my face somehow stayed calm. I kept thinking maybe I imagined it or maybe it was the dog's toy, but nope. I recognized the object. It was the exact same keychain the woman had been searching for. I tried to casually look around without making it obvious, and I realized the dog had been moving under the table more than I thought. It wasn't restless. It was busy. Kyle kept sipping his drink like nothing was happening, tapping his foot in this slow rhythm like he was waiting for something. Next, the dog slid over to the group of teenagers sitting behind me. One of them had his phone on the edge of the table, screen facing up. Before anyone could react, the dog moved underneath like a little fuzzball ninja. It brushed against the teen's leg, then disappeared. Kyle smiled in this small, satisfied way. The dog returned a moment later with something bulging under its vest. Kyle leaned down, pretending to adjust the strap, and stuffed something into his jacket pocket. I couldn't see what it was, but I saw the teen turn around in confusion a second later, staring at the empty space where his phone used to be. That's when it fully hit me. This wasn't random or innocent. Kyle wasn't just a guy with a dog he adored. He was using the dog as some kind of low-key pickpocket, a furry thief, a moving distraction, and he was absolutely unfazed by the chaos he was leaving behind. I felt my pulse spike. I didn't know whether I should say something, leave quietly, or call someone. But the idea of confronting him with the dog right there felt like a bad choice, mostly because Kyle had this weird calm energy the whole time, like he was ready for anything. I didn't trust that. Then he leaned back in his chair like he was relaxing after a job well done. He looked at me and grinned, not in a friendly way but in this odd, knowing way. He tapped his jacket lightly and said the dog had a special talent for collecting. He said it softly, like it was a compliment or an inside joke. I pretended to laugh because my brain was panicking. I grabbed my bag trying to act casual. I told him I needed to head home early because my cousin needed help with something. It was the same excuse I use for everything, but he just nodded like he expected me to leave around that time anyway. The dog tilted its head at me, and I swear it looked proud of itself. When I stood up, I checked the bottom of my chair just in case the dog planted something there, because honestly at that point anything felt possible. I walked away from the cave, trying not to look back. I didn't breathe properly until I turned the corner and the place disappeared behind a building. I checked my bag right away. Everything was still there, thank God, but I blocked Kyle before I even reached the bus stop because I didn't want him or his tiny criminal sidekick anywhere near my life again. I didn't really think much when I agreed to meet Rania for coffee. Honestly, I just wanted a normal afternoon. Nothing dramatic, nothing confusing, nothing involving tiny criminal dogs or witness relocation drama. I just wanted a regular date where two people drink something warm and talk about boring stuff like school stress or how expensive everything has gotten. When she suggested a small coffee shop near the library, it sounded safe, cozy, predictable in a good way. The place she picked had that quiet vibe where the tables wobble a little and the menu signs look like someone handwrote them years ago. The air smelled like cinnamon and old textbooks. A couple of students were scattered around with laptops that looked like they'd survived a storm. It wasn't fancy at all, which I liked. I got there early because the bus was faster than I expected, so I grabbed a seat next to the window. The light outside wasn't too bright, just soft enough to make a shop feel like a warm cave. I ordered an iced matcha because I didn't feel like dealing with hot drinks. I was halfway through sipping it when I saw her walk in. She looked completely normal. Hoodie, sneakers, hair tied with one of those thick scrunchies. She waved like she already knew we'd get along. I waved back because she seemed chill. She sat down, ordered a drink, and started talking about how she had been reorganizing her room all morning and how it looked way worse after cleaning than before. I laughed because I know that exact struggle. For the first few minutes, she was exactly what I hoped for. Simple. Normal. Just a girl who liked coffee and was annoyed at her messy room. But then she glanced down at her tote bag. I didn't think anything of it at first. It was just a big canvas tote with a faded print on the front. She tucked it a little closer to her chair and took another sip of her drink. I only noticed the shift because she kept touching the zipper like she was checking something inside. I asked her if she'd just come from the library since we were right next to it. She shook her head and said no, that she was coming from home. And then she said that she had something weird to show me. She said it like she'd been waiting for the exact moment to bring it up. I laughed awkwardly because usually when someone tells you they have something weird to show you on a first date, it goes downhill pretty fast. But she looked excited, not creepy, so I nodded and said okay. She unzipped the tote bag slowly, almost dramatically, then reached inside. I braced myself for something like a sketchbook, maybe some art project. But when her hand came out, it was holding a doll. Not a cute doll. Not a funny doll. Not even a normal doll. It was the kind of doll you'd see on an old shelf in a thrift store and think, yeah, that's haunted. The face was smooth and pale, but the eyes looked too shiny, almost like they were watching both of us. The hair was short and kind of messy, but definitely styled on purpose. The clothes were modern though. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Almost the same outfit I was wearing. I froze. She smiled like she didn't notice my soul leaving my body. She said this was one of her favorites. Then she said something that made my brain completely flip. She said she made dolls based on people she met on dating apps. My jaw nearly hit the table. I don't think I blinked for a whole 10 seconds. She kept going like she was discussing her favorite hobby, not the scariest thing I'd heard all year. She said she didn't mean for it to sound strange, but she liked capturing people's energy. She said every time she planned to meet someone, she'd study their pictures and make a doll version of them ahead of time so she'd compare the vibe in real life. I slowly realized the doll she pulled out was supposed to be me. She held it like it was fragile, turning it slightly so the light hit its face. And the more I stared, the more details I recognized. My hair, my jacket, even the little keychain hanging off my backpack, recreated in tiny plastic. She said she spent hours getting the face right, and then she started explaining how the dolls helped her feel prepared for real interactions. I couldn't breathe for a second. I kept imagining her sitting in her room surrounded by dozens of dolls modeled after different people, and then she confirmed it. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos, showing me shelf after shelf filled with dolls. Each one was dressed differently. Each one looked eerily like a real person. She said every doll had a backstory based on what she imagined the person's life was like. She talked about them like they were her friends or at least her little plastic roommates. She said she'd made so many over the past year that she had to buy extra shelves from a thrift store just to keep them all organized. She even mentioned that she sat them in groups sometimes, based on who she thought would get along. I felt my stomach drop, but I forced a smile because I didn't know how to react without making everything super awkward. She kept explaining her process. How she carefully picks out the clothes, how she shapes the heads, how she paints the tiny details. It wasn't even a hobby that scared me. It was how intensely she talked about it. The way her voice softened like she was describing real people she cared about. She set the doll down on the table gently, like it was made of glass. I couldn't stop staring at it. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't even want to look at it, but I couldn't look away. She said she brought it because she wanted to see if she captured me accurately. She said she hoped I wasn't weirded out because some people didn't understand the art. She said she was happy to show me the rest of the collection if I ever came over. I nodded politely, but inside I was already plotting my exit strategy. I took a long sip of my drink, just so I had something to do with my hands. The doll stared at me like it knew things it shouldn't. I told her I needed to check the bus schedule because my cousin texted me earlier, asking if I could be home by a certain time. It wasn't a great excuse, but it was the first thing I could think of. She said she understood and packed the doll back into her tote like she was putting a baby down for a nap. We walked outside together. She waved goodbye with a bright smile and told me she'd update the doll later based on how the date went. My skin tightened hearing that, like she was going to give a progress report to a tiny plastic version of me. I waited until she turned the corner before pulling my phone out and blocking her. I don't block people often, but this felt like one of those times where you don't question it. I always tell myself I'm going to take a break from dating apps, and then something stupid happens at home and I end up downloading them again like there's some kind of emergency exit. That's exactly how I matched with Brian. My cousins were arguing in the living room about who roomed the Wi-Fi, the dog was barking at literally nothing, and my aunt kept yelling over everyone like she was narrating a sports match. I grabbed my phone, flopped onto my bed, and started swiping just so my brain could focus on anything else. Brian's profile didn't look weird, which honestly shocked me because by that point I'd seen everything from dudes posing with fish to guys standing in front of mirrors pretending they didn't see the reflection of their dirty rooms. Brian was just smiling in a hoodie, standing in front of a sandwich shop. Normal. Too normal. I should have known then that normal people online usually aren't normal in real life. But whatever. He seemed chill. We decided to meet at this diner near downtown that's always kind of loud in a familiar way. It has those old blue seats that squeak if you even breathe near them, and the menu is so huge that they hand you a binder instead of a paper sheet. I got there early, mostly because I took the bus, and it came 6 minutes sooner than I expected. I picked a booth near the window and tried to look casual while I messed with the straw wrapper for my drink. He walked in right on time. Hoodie, jeans, messy hair, carrying some weird confidence like he already knew this date was going to go fine. He slid into the booth opposite me and smiled like he practiced it. Not creepy, not over the top, just polished. It threw me off a little, but he seemed friendly, so I pushed the awkward feeling aside. The conversation started normal. School stuff, work stuff, how the weather was acting strange. It felt like one of those simple dates where you're just glad the person isn't bizarre. But then he leaned back and mentioned his parents in this offhand way, and that's when things started drifting downhill. He said his mom worked in healthcare, which is totally normal. Lots of parents do. But he said it in his really casual voice, like he wanted me to ask more. So I did. He said his mom worked at a clinic that sounded familiar, but I didn't think anything weird about it at first. He said he grew up around medical stuff and thought it was kinda cool. Then he said the name of the clinic. The same clinic I used. I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't want to assume anything, so I just nodded. He kept talking like he didn't notice the shift in my face. He started naming random things about helping out in the office when he was younger, like sorting files or cleaning shelves. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Clinics have tons of patients. The chances of anything weird happening were basically zero, or so I thought. We ordered food, and everything on the table smelled amazing. Fries, sandwiches, all the good stuff. I was starting to relax when he casually said something that knocked the air out of my chest. He said he remembered my last name. Not from the app. Not from a mutual friend. Not from school. From a file. I just stared at him. My brain felt like it lagged. He kept going like he hadn't just detonated a bomb between us. He said he saw my name a while back when he was in his mom's office. He said he didn't need to look, but the way he said it told me he absolutely meant to look. He said he got curious because he recognized my face from around the neighborhood or something, but the timeline didn't even line up with that excuse. Then he leaned forward a little and said he was glad I seemed healthy now. Healthy now. That's when I realized he wasn't talking about public info. He wasn't talking about something general. He'd read my file. Actually read it. I didn't breathe for a long second. He didn't seem embarrassed. He didn't even seem aware of how messed up it was. He just kept talking about it like it was some weird bonding moment. He mentioned a detail about a visit I'd had that I never posted about. Something private. Seriously private. Something only me, the doctor, and maybe the nurse would know. My entire body felt like it was trying to fold into itself. I could barely hear the diner noise anymore. All I could think about was him flipping through papers with my name on them, learning things that were absolutely none of his business. He smiled across the table like this was all normal, like he was sharing a fun fact. He said it was interesting. He said he kind of felt like he already knew me. He said seeing me in person after reading the file made the date feel familiar. It took everything in me not to get up and walk out right away. I felt my hands gripping the edge of the table. The food in front of me suddenly looked like plastic. I kept nodding because I didn't want to draw attention. Yes, I know that sounds dramatic, but when someone casually mentions having access to your private info, you don't exactly want to provoke anything. I told him I needed to use the restroom. I grabbed my bag, stood up slowly, walked for the hallway near the back, and then kept walking straight past the bathroom door, out the employee exit, and into the alley behind the diner. The air out there smelled like old grease and trash bags, but at least it didn't feel like someone was staring through me. I didn't look back. I headed straight toward the street and walked until I could call a ride. My phone buzzed with a message from him, but I didn't read it. I blocked him before the car even pulled up. The whole ride home, I stared out the window feeling like parts of my life had been stolen from me without me even noticing. I didn't even tell my cousins what happened because I didn't want them freaking out. The next day, I switched clinics. Didn't even think twice. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. By this, I mean agreeing to go on first dates when I spent the last few weeks watching true crime shows and thinking I'd never be stupid enough to put myself in a stranger's hands again. But there I was scrolling through a dating app late on a Tuesday when Amanda's profile popped up. She seemed normal enough. Smiling, casual hoodie, messy hair pulled back in a way that somehow made her look both lazy and cute. Nothing seemed off at first glance. She wrote something about loving coffee and awkwardly spilling drinks, which I thought was funny and relatable. I swiped right. We exchanged a few messages over the next couple of days. Her tone was casual, friendly, and somehow confident without being pushy. She suggested meeting at this tiny cafe near the park, the kind of place where the music is soft and the chairs are uneven but comfortable. It had exposed brick walls, potted plants on every ledge, and a warm smell of roasting coffee beans that makes you feel like you're supposed to sit and stay forever. I liked the sound of it. It felt safe and chill, which is exactly what I wanted. I got there a little early, mostly because I hate being late. The place was almost empty, just a few regulars scattered around with laptops and half-drunk lats. I grabbed a small table near the window, letting the sunlight hit my notebook as I pretended to jot down notes, but was really scrolling my phone. About 10 minutes later, Amanda walked in, hair slightly messy, smile bright, and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She waved like we'd been friends forever, which was weird but not unsettling yet. She sat down, and we started talking about normal things, movies, favorite coffee drinks, mildly embarrassing things about school or work. She laughed at the right times, nodded at the right moments, and generally seemed like a pleasant person. For the first 20 minutes, I actually started to relax. Maybe I was wrong about dating apps. Maybe I could meet someone without any immediate red flags. Then the first spill happened. Amanda reached across the table for her iced latte and somehow knocked it over, spilling a small puddle on the table and onto my arm. She gasped and apologized, hurriedly grabbing napkins and patting the liquid away. I laughed awkwardly, brushing it off because accidents happen, and honestly, the spill wasn't even that bad. But then she accidentally knocked over her sugar packets. A few minutes later, she tipped her bag slightly, causing some of its contents to shift noisily across the table. I didn't think much of it at first. Again, accidents happen, right? But when it happened the third and fourth time in quick succession, my brain started picking up on a pattern. I noticed her eyes flicking to my bag each time she spilled something. Each time she leaned just enough for me to move slightly, almost like she was testing how I would react. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was paranoia, that maybe she was just clumsy. But there was something off about the precision of her clumsiness. Every minor accident seemed timed to make me adjust my bag, reach for my drink, or move my arm. And the way she smiled afterward, so casual, so innocent, was the part that unsettled me the most. We finished our drinks, and I started packing up my things. That's when she accidentally knocked her bag off her chair. I bent down to help her pick it up, and she gave this little shrug, apologizing again, but she didn't seem embarrassed. I noticed her hands lingered near the bottom of her tote, adjusting something I couldn't see. My gut twisted. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't until I got home and dumped my bag on the floor that I found it. A small, hard object taped to the bottom of my bag with a tiny piece of gum. I picked it up, staring at it, and immediately recognized it for what it was. A tracking device. My heart started racing, and I felt my stomach drop into a pit I didn't even know existed. Every spill, every nudge, every accident had been a distraction, a way to manipulate me into positioning my bag so she could attach this thing without me noticing. I held the device in my hands, feeling a mix of disbelief and panic. I couldn't believe it. I kept replaying the date in my head. The spills, the knocks, the overly casual way she had leaned across the table. Every moment suddenly had a sinister undertone. She wasn't clumsy. She wasn't forgetful. She had planned all of it to plant this device. My entire afternoon had been staged. I called the electronics store that handles tracking gadgets, and they walked me through how to disable it safely without damaging my property. They told me to save the device as evidence in case I needed it later. While on the phone, I sat on my floor, shaking slightly, trying to process how someone could turn a casual coffee date into a surveillance operation. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything else. My apartment felt suddenly vulnerable, like a part of it had been invaded without my knowledge. After I disabled the device, I carefully documented everything and then blocked Amanda on all apps in my phone. I didn't respond to her messages, and I made a mental note to never, ever let someone get that close without knowing exactly what they were capable of. Even thinking about her smile and the way she acted so casual made my skin crawl. I spent the next few days checking every bag I own, every zipper, every pocket, wondering if she had tried this before or if she had planted other devices I hadn't discovered. I felt hyper-aware of everyone around me when I walked to class or got coffee, imagining strangers using the same spill trick to distract me. Every casual touch, every accidental bump on the street felt suspicious. It wasn't just the tracking device itself. It was the way she had manipulated the entire date. The calm demeanor, the small acts that seemed innocent, the precision with which she created these distractions. She had made a normal afternoon feel like a rehearsal for a much larger, more invasive plan. Even thinking about it now, weeks later, my stomach tightens. I realized I had been too trusting, too casual with someone I barely knew. The way she smiled, the way she acted like a normal coffee date, hit a level of premeditation that I wasn't prepared for. It made me rethink every first date I've ever been on, wondering if other people had been as calculating without me noticing. I still go to that cafe sometimes, mostly because it's near my favorite bookstore and the staff is nice, but I always check my bag before I sit down. I've upgraded all my personal belongings with extra safety measures. My phone is more secure. My bags are weighted and checked thoroughly. What should have been a fun coffee date became a lesson in vigilance and personal security I never had asked for. Looking back, the spills were the first obvious clue, but I had ignored them because I wanted to believe in a normal interaction. That was my mistake. Amanda wasn't just clumsy. She was strategic, patient, and careful. And while nothing physically happened that day, the emotional weight of realizing someone had intentionally tried to track me was crushing. So yeah, that was my date with Amanda, a girl who seemed completely harmless, casual, and even charming. But every spill, every bump, every laugh was part of a plan to put me under surveillance without me noticing. It's not something I would wish on anyone, and honestly, it's going to take a long time before I trust someone new with even a simple coffee meeting. The worst part, I never even got a chance to see if she was planning more. I'll never know what she would have done next if I hadn't discovered the tracking device. It's like she orchestrated an entire afternoon of psychological manipulation just to see how easy it would be to get close to me. Every coffee shop, every casual chat, every seemingly normal date now feels like it could hide 1,000 little tricks, and that's the legacy Amanda left me with. I'd never thought I'd end up on a date with someone who basically treated me like a walking reminder of my family's legal history. But apparently that's how Chris came into my life. Honestly, the whole thing started on a Monday night when I was scrolling through dating apps after an exhausting day of classes. My roommate was blasting music in the living room, My dog was shedding on every surface in the apartment, and I figured why not distract myself with some superficial swiping. Chris' profile popped up. Normal picture, casual smile, nothing flashy. But there was this one line in his bio that seemed slightly off, something about justice being a personal project. I shrugged. Lots of people say cryptic stuff on apps. I swiped right. We matched, exchanged a few messages, and he seemed pleasant enough. Not overly chatty, not too intense. We set up a date at a small Italian restaurant near the riverfront. I liked the idea of it. Little brick building, outdoor tables, string lights hanging across the patio. Felt casual enough for a first date, and the lighting wasn't too bad for avoiding awkward shadows when you're smiling like a nervous idiot. I got there early because I wanted to scope out the place, and also because I wanted to appear calm, like my life wasn't spiraling just from ordering pasta and trying to look normal. The restaurant smelled like fresh bread and garlic. Honestly, I almost forgot why I was even stressed until Chris walked in. He was wearing a dark jacket over a hoodie, jeans, sneakers, and had that casual energy people have when they think they're in control of the room. He smiled, waved, and I waved back, smiling like I knew nothing about what was about to go down. We sat down outside under the string lights. I liked sitting outside because it gave me a tiny sense of escape, knowing I could always bolt into the street if things got weird. Chris ordered water, I ordered a soda, and we started talking. First, it was normal. Movies, music, favorite restaurants, stupid stuff about Netflix shows no one actually finishes. I started to think maybe he was a normal person and my paranoia from all the previous bad dates was unwarranted. But then, somewhere between the third breadstick and the salad, he leaned back in his chair and mentioned my father. I froze slightly, trying to process. My father's name is not exactly common, and he didn't just say it randomly. He said something like, "I was involved in your dad's civil trial a few years ago." I blinked. That's when I noticed the way he was looking at me. Calm, focused, like he wasn't just making conversation. He wanted a reaction. He went on to say he had been a juror on that case. The case wasn't huge, but it had dragged on long enough that I remembered it being a low-level nightmare for my family. He said he believed my family owed him a debt for the not guilty verdict he claimed he engineered. I didn't even know how to respond at first. My brain locked up, and all I could hear was the faint clinking of cutlery and the distant sound of a bus honking down the street. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was joking, but his expression didn't change. Not a single flicker. He actually believed this. He pulled out some notes from his pocket, small folded papers, and started casually referring to details from the trial. Names of witnesses. Dates. Specific phrases my father had said in court. He referenced things I had never even thought about remembering, things my dad had mentioned in passing. I had no idea how he got the information, but he clearly had it down on paper. As he talked, I felt this creeping sense of violation. It wasn't just that he knew all this, it was that he expected me to treat it as normal dinner conversation. He kept referring to my family as if I was somehow responsible for repaying him. He explained that his life had been ruined by the uncertainty of that verdict, that he had waited years for someone from my family to acknowledge his contribution to the case. I stared at him, hoping he'd realize he was making a normal person extremely uncomfortable, but he didn't. He just kept going. He leaned forward and said he wanted to figure out a way we could balance things. He wasn't asking for money outright, at least not yet, but his phrasing made it clear he thought the date was some kind of negotiation, some meeting to discuss restitution. I tried to keep calm, nodding occasionally, hoping he'd get bored and move on to something else. I sipped my drink slowly, tried to make my smile polite but disengaged. My fork felt heavy in my hand. Everything smelled like garlic and bread, but tasted like iron in my mouth. He even started mapping out some convoluted plan that involved me helping him somehow track what my family owed him. He mentioned legal loopholes and strategies, ways I could use my father's contacts to make things right. I couldn't tell if he was insane or if he really believed I had the power to fix whatever imaginary damage he thought had been done. I tried changing the topic, mentioned a movie I saw recently, talked about a friend's birthday, anything to break the rhythm of the conversation. He ignored it or pivoted back seamlessly to the civil trial. Every attempt I made to redirect him felt futile. It was like trying to talk over a radio station that only played static. The moment I fully accepted that this date was going to be completely unredeemable was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me messages he'd saved from the trial. Screenshots of jury notes, emails, even something that looked like court documents. He said he wanted me to see them so I would understand the magnitude of the debt. My stomach sank. I didn't even eat after that. I just stared at the table, counting every tile in the patio floor, pretending I wasn't slowly panicking. At one point, he leaned back and smiled, saying he was glad we were having this honest conversation. Honest conversation. I wanted to stand up and leave, but I couldn't figure out a polite exit. I couldn't tell the waiter I was being blackmailed by a guy across the table without sounding insane. The breadsticks stared at me accusingly, as if they were complicit in the whole thing. Finally, I decided to get up and use the restroom. I needed a minute to breathe, to figure out how to escape without triggering some unknown obligation or making him angrier. I walked toward the door, telling him I'd be right back, though I had no intention of coming back. As soon as I stepped onto the street, I felt my shoulders relax just a fraction, though my heart was still racing. I didn't come back inside. I didn't even go near the restaurant again. I walked to the next corner, called a rideshare, and just stared out the window as the city passed by. I kept thinking about the way he had casually described his expectations, the way he had spread out notes like a board game, the way he believed a dinner date was the perfect opportunity to discuss a civil trial. I never responded to his messages again, locked him on every app and phone contact I had for him. I don't even want to think about whether he's still holding on to that debt in his head. But yeah, that was my date with Chris. A pleasant-looking guy who walked in pretending to be normal but treated my family's past legal drama like it was a casual discussion topic. I don't even know what I expected when I signed up for dating apps again, but honestly, I thought at least some of the dates would be boring in a normal way. Instead, I got a live-action nightmare about my dad's civil trial, complete with paperwork, emotional blackmail, and a guy who thought a dinner date could solve years of imagined injustice. That was Chris. A calm afternoon, string lights, garlic bread, and a man who somehow made me feel responsible for events I had zero control over. I left with no food, a shaky stomach, and a lesson I never wanted to learn, which is that sometimes normal-looking guys are carrying decades of obsession in their pockets, ready to spill over your pasta plate. I thought I was just going for a simple walk. That's it. Nothing fancy, no agenda, just fresh air, maybe a little awkward small talk, and the hope that my date wouldn't be completely unbearable. So when I matched with Sarah, I figured a walk in the park would be perfect. Her profile made her look sweet and normal, sunlight in her hair, a backpack, some quote about enjoying the little things in life. Totally harmless. At least, that's what I thought. We agreed to meet at the city park near the fountain, the kind of place where joggers weave past old couples feeding pigeons, and dogs chase sticks with reckless enthusiasm. I got there early, kicking at the gravel path, trying to appear casual. She arrived exactly on time, smiling, waving, carrying one of those reusable water bottles you see everyone lugging around these days. I waved back, and we started walking. At first, it was pleasant enough. She asked questions about my work, my hobbies, where I'd grown up, and I asked the same of her. Nothing creepy, nothing off. Just normal, awkward first date chatter while the leaves crunched under our shoes. The park smelled like damp earth and late season flowers, and I started to relax, thinking maybe she really was just sweet and interesting. But then she slowed down. We had been wandering for a few blocks, and suddenly she stopped at a very specific park bench tucked under a cluster of old oak trees. I thought maybe she just liked the shade, so I didn't question it at first. She turned to me with a very calm expression, almost too calm, and I noticed how her eyes stayed locked on mine, like she was measuring my reaction to something I didn't know. Then she started talking. She told me this was the bench where her previous boyfriend had proposed. The way she said it wasn't casual reminiscing. It was deliberate, as if she was testing me. I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond, and she smiled that same calm, measuring smile. Then she said the words that made my stomach drop. She made him disappear. I froze. The park suddenly felt too quiet, the birds too loud, the leaves too crunchy underfoot. She wasn't joking. She wasn't making a metaphor. The implication was clear, and I realized I was standing here in a public park, being told that this person had done something terrible to someone in her past. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face, and then asked if I felt ready for that kind of commitment. Ready for commitment. I swallowed hard, trying to process what she had just said. The calmness of her tone was what made it even more terrifying. No hesitation, no guilt, just an evaluation of whether I was the kind of person who could meet her standards for involvement in her life. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. My brain kept looping on the phrase "made him disappear." My eyes darted around, looking for exits, thinking about how I could get out of this walk without making her suspicious or aggressive. My feet felt rooted to the gravel, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves felt like it was too bright, almost spotlighting the panic that was racing through me. I tried to respond casually, like I had misheard her, maybe misunderstood the context, but she didn't let up. She leaned slightly closer, still smiling, still calm, and started talking about lessons learned and how certain experiences shaped her expectations for relationships. Every word was deliberate, every movement measured. I realized I had no idea who I was walking with. She had spent the entire first part of the date lulling me into a false sense of safety. The rest of the walk became a blur. My mind was half on what she had said and half on scanning the park for anyone who might notice if things went sideways. She kept talking about her philosophy on relationships, what she considered acceptable behavior in a partner, and how past partners had failed her. I tried to nod, tried to give minimal responses, hoping she wouldn't sense the fear bubbling under my skin. Eventually, we circled back near the fountain, and she seemed satisfied with my reactions, whatever that meant. She didn't ask for anything else, didn't suggest another meetup, but the way she looked at me as we said goodbye made my stomach churn. That smile, it wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone evaluating potential threats or opportunities, and I realized I had just spent over an hour in that person's presence with no real sense of safety. I walked home in a daze. The park felt huge and empty after I left, even though it was still populated with joggers and dog walkers. My phone buzzed with a text from her, asking if I had enjoyed the walk. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the app again for a few days. My usual post-date excitement and casual reflection were gone, replaced with this tight, nauseating awareness of how wrong the day could have gone. For weeks after, I couldn't stop replaying the date, the way she had selected that exact bench, the calmness of her confession, the way she measured my reactions, and then asked if I was ready for a commitment. It all replayed in my mind. It wasn't just a weird date anymore. It was a lesson in reading people, in understanding that appearances and smiles can hide a level of premeditation you don't want to encounter. I don't know what I expected when I went on the date. A normal walk, maybe some laughs, maybe a second coffee. Instead, I got evaluated, tested, and casually told about someone's disappearance. I told a few friends, but even they gave me that half-laugh, half-worried look, like they didn't know whether to believe me or check the news for missing persons reports. Eventually, I went back to the park, but I never sat on that bench again. I avoid the corner of that cluster of oaks. I don't think about what she's doing now, or if she's still walking around, quietly assessing the people she meets. I just know that one walk changed how I view casual dates, casual encounters, and the way people can manipulate the smallest moments to terrify you without ever raising their voice. A calm walk in the park that turned into a high-stakes evaluation on a bench I should have never stopped at. One smile, one statement, and a sudden realization that the person next to you might not be as harmless as they seem. I walked away alive, but a lot more careful. I walked away wondering if anyone else I meet could be hiding that same level of cold calculation behind a casual smile. I thought dating was supposed to be casual. You meet someone, chat a little, maybe laugh, maybe cringe a little at the awkward parts, and then see if there's a spark. That's what I thought. I had no idea that Tyler's version of casual included secretly recording me for a freelance expose on modern dating. We matched on a dating app, and at first he seemed normal enough. Profile picture with a backpack in front of a city skyline, smiling like he was approachable but confident, a bio that mentioned he liked indie music and reading in cafes. Standard, nothing weird. We exchanged a few messages, joking about dating disasters, favorite movies, and coffee preferences. He suggested meeting at this little cafe tucked into an artsy neighborhood. It had dark wood tables, quirky wall art, and a faint smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with old books. I liked it immediately because it felt like a place where conversations actually mattered, not just some chain that played overly loud music. I got there a little early because I always do, and snagged a small table near a window where the sunlight hit just right. He arrived 5 minutes later, hoodie under a denim jacket, sneakers scuffed but clean, and that same calm, easy smile. We started talking immediately, and at first, it was fine. Casual stuff, work, music, favorite books. I started to relax, thinking maybe this would be a low-stress date for once. But soon I noticed little things that were slightly off. He kept moving his phone around on the table, subtly tilting it toward me whenever I spoke. Occasionally he would glance around the room, but his eyes always came back to me, like he was checking whether he was capturing everything just right. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I ignored it at first, thinking maybe he was just nervous. Halfway through our drinks, he mentioned something that made my stomach knot. He casually said he was working on a project about desperation in modern dating, exploring how people act when they feel lonely or anxious. I laughed awkwardly, assuming he meant a survey or some sort of social study. That seemed fine, harmless even, until he leaned back, smirked slightly, and added that everything we're talking about tonight is part of the article. I froze. Part of the article. He wasn't joking. He wasn't being cute or self-deprecating. He had been recording the entire date, noting my reactions, my answers, even my body language for a story. My first instinct was to laugh it off, like maybe he was exaggerating, but the calm precision in his tone told me he wasn't. He believed it. He had meticulously planned this encounter as research for his expose. Suddenly, I became hyper-aware of every gesture, every word, every little nervous tick I had. The casual sipping of my coffee felt like a spotlight on my inadequacies. I tried to make small talk, hoping he wouldn't notice my discomfort, but it was useless. Every laugh, every hesitant comment, every story I told about past dating disasters was being consumed like raw data. I wasn't a person anymore, I was a case study. He went on to explain how he was documenting patterns, the way I shifted in my chair when nervous, the words I used when I was uncomfortable, the pauses I took before answering questions. He analyzed my tone of voice mid-sentence, pointing out subtleties I hadn't even realized I'd exhibited. It was exhausting to even think about, let alone experience in real time. I felt like I had been put under a microscope without consent. I wanted to leave, to just get up and run, but there was a part of me frozen, curious about what he would do next. The entire date became a surreal combination of casual conversation and clinical observation. Every topic I tried to steer toward, movies, work, hobbies, was dissected, categorized, and noted. I couldn't even tell if he was taking mental notes or writing them down secretly. The idea that I was basically acting for a story made my stomach twist. At one point, he casually mentioned a previous subject he had studied, comparing my answers and reactions to theirs. He analyzed my humor, my social confidence, and my ability to navigate conversation as if I was a specimen he had been studying for weeks. I realized he had likely done this before with other people, running the same experiment over and over. It was not just unsettling, it was invasive. I tried to laugh, to make a joke, to humanize myself again, but even my humor was met with analysis. He was noting everything: the timing of my punchlines, how genuine my laughter sounded, the subtle way I avoided certain topics. I felt like performance I hadn't agreed to put on, one where the stakes were embarrassment, vulnerability, and personal privacy. By the time we finished our drinks, I was exhausted. My mind kept replaying the way he had dissected every little moment. I tried to end the date politely, pretending to be fine, but inside I was shaking with the realization that someone had meticulously orchestrated a normal night out solely to record, analyze, and eventually write about me. I walked out into the night air, the city buzzing around me, and felt a strange mix of relief and violation. Even days later, I couldn't stop thinking about the date. I kept replaying moments, wondering what he had noted, what patterns he had seen, and whether anyone else would ever write about me without my consent. It wasn't just a bad date. It was an experience that blurred the line between ordinary social interaction and invasive research. Every coffee shop, every casual conversation, every online profile I interacted with suddenly felt vulnerable. I blocked him on every platform, deleted the app we matched on, and spent hours trying to convince myself that this was just a weird, isolated incident. But it wasn't easy. The thought that someone could enter your life so casually and use normal moments for analysis made me hyper-aware of everything I said and did afterward. I became careful with my words, cautious with my gestures, and skeptical of anyone who seemed just a little too charming. That night, and the days after, changed the way I thought about dating completely. I realized that normal-looking people can have agendas completely hidden beneath casual conversation and friendly smiles. Tyler's calm, confident demeanor masked a level of planning and observation that I wasn't prepared to deal with. What should have been a fun, ordinary date became a high-stakes social experiment where I was both subject and audience, and I had no idea how the experiment would end. So yeah, that was my date with Tyler. One moment we were laughing over coffee, the next I was unknowingly being recorded for an expose on dating. It's not the kind of story you tell lightly because it feels unbelievable, but every detail is real. Every joke, every reaction, every small movement was cataloged. I walked away physically fine but mentally tense, realizing that casual dating isn't always casual, and that some people's curiosity about human behavior can cross the line in ways you'll never see coming. The city felt different after that night. Cafes felt less like friendly spots and more like potential labs. Conversations felt less like exchanges and more like auditions. And I realized I would never forget the way Tyler smiled while turning what should have been a simple date into a calculated, invasive research project. I survived, but the experience made me question whether anyone I meet next could be as normal as they appear. I should have known from the start that Nicole was going to be intense, but I wasn't exactly expecting full-blown chaos on our first date. It all began when we matched on the app. Her pictures looked normal enough, smiling in front of a cafe, holding a book, wearing sunglasses on a sunny day. But her bio had that weird edge. Something about learning from the past and comparing experiences, which I didn't think much about at the time. I swiped right because, honestly, she looked like she'd be fun to talk to. We agreed to meet at a small sushi place downtown, the kind with minimal lighting, intimate booths, and a sushi conveyor belt that felt more like an amusement ride than dinner. I got there a few minutes early and chose a booth near the end of the line, thinking I'd have a bit of privacy. The place smelled of soy sauce and rice vinegar, and the low hum of conversation made it feel cozy. She walked in right on time, wearing a leather jacket and sneakers, hair tied back loosely. She waved like we were old friends, and I waved back, trying to hide how nervous I felt. She slid into the booth across from me, and we ordered drinks while I glanced at the menu, pretending to know what sushi I liked. The first 15 minutes were actually pleasant. We talked about work, music, movies, the usual small talk stuff you do on a first date. She laughed at my jokes and I laughed at hers, and I started to think maybe this wouldn't be terrible. Then she pulled out her phone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People check their phones. But she started scrolling with this focus that was oddly intense, like she was preparing for something. I tried to stay engaged in conversation, but she kept glancing down, smirking to herself, and muttering little things under her breath. Eventually, I realized she wasn't just looking at her phone. She had a list, a full list, a list of names. Ex-boyfriends, she said, though she didn't say it directly at first. She opened her phone and showed me a numbered list with names, some crossed out, some circled, some highlighted in red and yellow. My stomach sank. She explained that she kept track of her past relationships and liked to analyze them to understand why things went wrong. Fine, whatever. Some people journal, some people overthink. I shrugged it off. But then she did something that made my heart stop. She started calling them. On speakerphone. One by one. The first guy picked up, and she started asking him how he thought this date was going compared to theirs. Her tone was friendly, casual, almost like she was chatting with a buddy, but the fact that she was on speakerphone made me feel like I was in some twisted game show. She listened to his answer with this calculating look, occasionally laughing, and then moved to the next one. I couldn't believe what I was watching. She went down the list for almost half an hour. Each call followed the same pattern. She asked, she listened, she commented, and she recorded the information in notes on her phone. She would sometimes mutter things like interesting or make sense, while jotting down a small summary for each guy. It wasn't just weird. It was invasive, and I couldn't figure out if she was judging me, judging them, or judging herself. Maybe all three. I tried to keep a straight face, nodding when she asked questions that clearly weren't for me. I sipped my water slowly, pretending to be casually fascinated, but inside I was panicking. The sushi plates slid by, people glanced at us, and I felt trapped. There was no polite way to escape a conversation when she was actively comparing you to a dozen other guys in real time. Eventually, she hung up her phone and leaned back like nothing had happened. She smiled and asked me what I thought of the process. I wanted to say this is insane, but instead mumbled something about it being unique. She laughed and said she just wanted to make sure she knew what she was getting into this time, My stomach was twisting. She pulled out a notebook next. Apparently, she'd been jotting notes on all her ex-boyfriends for years. The notebook was full of pages like a database. Names, dates, memorable events, perceived personality traits, even silly things like favorite ice cream flavors or what movies they liked. And now, apparently, I was next. She flipped open a page and started taking mental notes, or so she said. I felt like I had stumbled into some twisted psychological experiment. She wasn't just collecting data. She was analyzing it, comparing it, and somehow using me as a subject in this live test. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus, couldn't figure out what part of this was normal dating behavior and what part was not. The rest of the date was a blur. She continued to ask me personal questions, then muttered things under her breath as she jotted down observations. Every laugh, every reaction, every answer was cataloged. By the time the check came, I was exhausted, drained, and completely freaked out. I paid quickly, shoved my wallet back in my pocket, and left the booth while she continued smiling, still taking notes like nothing was off. Outside, the air felt like relief and fear all mixed together. I walked fast, avoiding looking at my phone, worried she'd already started comparing me to some imaginary data set in real time. By the time I got home, I realized that I had to block her on everything. I didn't respond to her messages, didn't answer her calls, and immediately deleted the app we matched on. Even now, thinking about it, I get this weird tension in my chest. The whole concept of dating apps feels different. You never really know what someone's bringing to the table until it's staring you in the face like a spreadsheet of your personality traits, compared side by side to a dozen ex-boyfriends. I can't unsee it. Every time I meet someone new, part of me still wonders if they're taking notes, making lists, comparing me to past people in a way I'll never know about.